So this is where I land on this. Surveillance is good when it stops a kidnapping. It's good when it catches a killer. It's good when it pulls a stolen car off the road before a criminal disappears. But surveillance is bad when it tracks people driving to go potentially commit crimes. It's bad when it photographs Americans at a political rally. It's bad when a private company in Atlanta hands the ATF the movement records of an entire town without a warrant. The question isn't whether we have these cameras. The question is who controls the data and what the rules are. The federal government hasn't figured that out yet. Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona introduced legislation in March to require a warrant before federal agencies can access commercially available surveillance data like the Flock database. And my next guest is one of 4 co-sponsors who's been fighting warrantless surveillance inside the Republican conference for the last 5 years. He represents Georgia, the home state of Flock safety. The question on the table tonight is the one I just laid out. How do we keep the benefits and stop the abuses? Joining me now, Congressman Andrew Clyde of Georgia, co-sponsor of the Protect Liberty and End Warrantless Surveillance Act. Congressman, thank you so much for being here on David Pollack Prime Time. Just break it down for us. How can we prevent these cameras from being misused?
Well, David, great to be with you. I think Benjamin Franklin said it best, is that those who would trade essential liberty for a temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Yeah. We have rights in this country. The Fourth Amendment is one of those. It is not for sale. And when law enforcement purchases data, literally to track and to monitor someone for which they don't have a warrant to look at, then I think that's a problem. I think that crosses the line. So we need to look at these cameras. Yes, there are tremendous benefits to these cameras, but they can also be tremendously misused. Don't tell me that if you give the government the ability to surveil its people, that the government will go, oh, no, we're not going to surveil our people. Of course they will. We have seen it across the country in tremendous ways. It's just like the ATF creating a database of almost 1 billion federal firearms license transactions with individual citizens. Oh, it's not a searchable database, but using AI, it could probably be searched in a half a day. And they can know exactly what you've purchased. And that's a huge violation, not just a Fourth Amendment violation, but a Second Amendment violation as well. So we need to be looking at these for guardrails because our citizens have rights that must be protected. And that's why we're here. The Declaration of Independence, when it talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which are God-given rights, it says, and to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just authority from the consent of the governed. The government is here to preserve these rights, not to take them away.
Yeah, and I think, I hope everybody will agree with everything you just said. Who wants the government spying on them? Who doesn't cherish their right to privacy? And as technology increases, I really miss Scalia right now because Scalia was the best justice on privacy. And he had, in law school, we learned that Justice Scalia had this thing of he believed in privacy and he allowed certain surveillance except when they can look into your home. He had this, my law professor used to always joke that he never wanted to be seen in his home naked. But the idea here is we want obviously the law enforcement to have some tools to ensure that crimes are not being committed, especially if something's bad. Like I said in my motto, a kid goes missing or there's a terrorist walking around with a nuke. We want to be able to find these people. But at the same time, we don't want this technology expanding to a place where the government can now look into your home or predict the ability of you to commit a crime and then take all this data and then give it to law enforcement and say, hey, well, look, we have all this data you can use to prosecute somebody, whether or not you even have the right to access this information if no crime was even committed. And that's the scary part here is that this surveillance data is available to law enforcement before probable cause of a crime is even there. And I think it's the same thing with FISA, with the reauthorization of FISA. It's, well, if you're on the phone with a terrorist, you've done nothing wrong. But if you're on the phone with somebody who's under surveillance that's foreign, they don't need a warrant to get the information from you as a private citizen. That is the big line here. And so let me ask you, would a warrant, are you okay if this data gets accumulated if it's only available with a warrant? Or do you think this data shouldn't be accumulated at all?
No. I mean, this data is basically accumulated by private companies, but you should have to have a warrant, just like in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that you talked about, FISA. That is to surveil foreign agents to protect our country. But when that tremendous authority, that massive ability to surveil is used against American citizens, it needs to be used under a warrant, when a warrant has to be gotten in order to access this data to surveil American citizens. I mean, the Fourth Amendment is not for sale. That's actually a piece of legislation that talks about this very thing. The government cannot go buy this data unless they have probable cause to do it. And people say, well, insurance companies can buy the data. Other folks, marketing companies can buy the data. Why can't the government? Well, these commercial companies can't put you in jail. They can't take away your liberty. They can't take away your rights. The government can. That's why the government has to have a warrant. And that's why it's so critically important to keep this out of the hands of the government until there is actual, reason for a warrant.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. You made me think of it when you talk about the commercial use of some of these things. I mean, we all know that if you're in public, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy. And so if somebody wants to put a camera somewhere in a public place, they can do that. If that's license plate data, if that's whatever, the make and model of your vehicle, where you're shopping, and somebody can sell that information. But I guess there's a real conversation that we could be had, maybe future legislation, about the commercial use of things that are taken in the public sector. It doesn't, just because you can see me in the public and I can be recorded in public, doesn't mean I have a right to profit off of what you can see. And so that's another thing to look at, too, is how we are allowing companies, though, and encouraging people to go and use technology. Because now we're not talking about just a guy with a camera. We're talking about technology being used to get information that's being sold for commercial purposes and now misused for prosecutions. I think there's a lot that we can work on here to still leverage the public's right to privacy versus the need to, I guess, accumulate this data. But I know, Congressman, you're going to be on top of it, and I look forward to hearing about your work on it. Please come back soon so we can pick up where we left off on this conversation. A lot happening in Washington, and thank you for your work up there, my friend.
Well, thank you. Great to be with you, David.
Same here. Thank you. Last week, I had a conversation with one of the strongest Second Amendment voices in the United States House of Representatives, a Navy commander, a gun store owner, a member of the House Appropriations Committee. Gun Owners of America has called him, quote, no better champion in Congress on this issue. Congressman Andrew Clyde of Georgia. And we talked about what happened in Washington and what veterans watching this Memorial Day weekend need to know about the fight to restore the rights of those who served. Here's that conversation. I do want to follow up on something, though, too, because there's other things happening in Washington besides just your work to protect Americans' privacy. You've also been involved in a very important piece of legislation. You're a big gun guy. You're involved in an important piece of legislation to protect veterans' rights to keep and bear arms. It's crazy that that group of people, among all group of people, would be the group of people you would have to protect their rights to bear arms, considering those are the ones we trained to bear them. But talk about the legislation you have, because there's some really interesting rules that have been applied for a long time that prevents veterans from owning guns. Can you talk about your work on that?
Sure. I mean, just think about it. The veterans are the ones that not just trained with the guns, but they're also the ones who use those firearms to protect our liberties. And then, when they start to age and they need some help from the Veterans Administration, with their checkbook or their benefits, their VA benefits, then we are going to give them a fiduciary, and at the same time that we give them a fiduciary that will help them, that we also report them to NICS, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, and prohibit them from exercising their Second Amendment rights. I'm sorry, that puts them in a terrible position of saying, okay, do I want my benefits? And if I ask for my benefits, for help with my benefits, then I risk eliminating my Second Amendment rights, or do I want to keep my Second Amendment rights and not get the benefits that I fought for and deserve as a veteran, as someone who put themselves out there, wore the cloth of our nation to protect our liberties? That's a despicable place to be, and to put our veterans in that sort of a place is wrong. And so through the appropriations process, we actually put a couple of riders in there. Started in FY24, just a couple of years ago, when I got on the appropriations committee. We prevented the VA from doing that, but through that temporary process, we really needed a permanent fix. And so on the floor yesterday was a bill, and I proudly spoke in favor of it, voted in favor of it, and that would permanently prohibit the Veterans Administration from reporting veterans to the NICS system to prohibit them from purchasing a firearm or exercising their Second Amendment rights just because they had a fiduciary assigned to them to help them with their finances or help them with their veterans benefits. So that, that's critically important that we protect those veterans and protect those rights. They fought for us. We need to fight for them.
Coming up,